everybody. Welcome to the Abroaders Travel Podcast, your weekly meetup with thousands of entrepreneurs, hustlers, creators, nomads, ninjas, wanderers, and world changers, all seeking to build the skills and connections to live a life without borders. If you want to learn more about what we do or download our entire podcast archive, check out the website, abroaders.com.
Happy Wednesday morning, and welcome to another episode of the Abroaders Podcast. I'm AJ here with Eric in Medellin, Colombia. And show notes for today's episode can be found at abroaders.com/united2, as in the number 2.
All right, man. Well, let's start out with a little bit of detail about Colombia here. This is our third trip, my third trip, I think.
Yeah, only my second trip.
And this time we're going to be here for quite a while. Looks like at least 3 months, maybe 4. I'm really excited to spend a bit more time here in Colombia.
Yeah, some fun facts. So we're in Medellin. So some fun facts about Colombia. Only South American country to have a coastline on the Pacific and the Caribbean. The damn Spanish, man. They became independent from the Spanish in 1810, July 20th. There's a lot of Independence Days in July. I think Canada Day is in July. We're obviously in July. Colombia's in July. There's a lot going on in July. And for those of you that don't know, Medellin's not a small city, a little over 2 million people. It's the second biggest city in Colombia behind the capital city, which is Bogota, which is a pretty big city. I think they've got 8 or 9 million people in Bogota.
Yeah. And so first impressions, anything different that you've noticed since we were here? It's about a year since we were here last time.
I think a little bit more development in this neighborhood. We're somewhat familiar with this neighborhood. We're in Poblado. It's a pretty nice neighborhood, but I feel like there's some new restaurants, some new shops. I just feel like it's an area that continues to develop and have new places opening up.
Yeah, definitely more buildings going up now than I remember seeing last time. Mm-hmm. And, possibly just the neighborhood that we're in is, maybe the spot where people are looking to live. But, I think overall, like a really nice city to live in. Airport's a little bit far if you're just trying to check out Medellin for a day. If you happen to be on a layover or something, it's maybe 45 minutes to get into downtown Medellin.
Yeah, it took us 45, and that was with virtually no traffic.
Yep. And the traffic doesn't seem to be a big issue here. We haven't been driving around.
I think downtown it can be frustrating, but it moves. I don't know. It's like pretty log jammed. And I recall last time going to the airport, once I got out of the city, the traffic wasn't too bad. But they've got the weird restrictions like they have in Sao Paulo, where depending on the day of the week, certain license plates ending in an odd number and even number can drive. So
yeah. All right, so moving on, we've got the Olympics just finished up, and I wanted to just run through this because I think the upcoming destinations for the Olympics are kind of interesting. So 2016 is now over. Very sad to have the Olympics be over. I really enjoyed watching it this year. But upcoming Olympics, so for the 2018 Winter Olympics, it's going to be in South Korea. And I honestly don't have a clue. Pyeongchang.
Which is oddly similar to North Korea, like Pyongyang.
Yeah, you're right. In fact, that's why I kind of wasn't sure.
No, it's Pyeongchang because I heard an ESPN commentator yesterday mention it. Okay. Yeah, so that's 2018, the Winter Olympics. Last one was in Sochi, Russia. We've got the Summer Games in 2020 in Tokyo.
Now, with the 2018 games, are those December 2018 or are those January 2018?
That's a really good question because that makes a pretty big difference.
It does. It makes almost a year of difference. But that being said, especially if it's in January of 2018, we're coming up on booking window for that. As far as sort of when you can start planning a trip with points. I'd be interested in checking that out. I think I'm more excited about the 2020 in Tokyo. Spent about a week in the Shibuya neighborhood in Tokyo with a friend of ours last year. And I think the Olympics will be pretty cool, although probably super expensive unless you have a friend that already has a place there.
Real estate is at a premium in Tokyo. 35 million people. I've heard some really high tech stuff is going to be going on for Tokyo for the Olympics. I'm trying to remember what it was, but not surprising.
Robots and self-driving cars, stuff like that.
Yeah.
After that, we've got Beijing again in 2022. I don't know how that happens, but I guess
the IOC is corrupt.
Little repeat. And then 2024, Budapest, Rome, Paris, or Los Angeles are all in the running.
Now, have the Olympics been in Paris before, do you know? Because they're in LA in 84.
In the 1920s, I think. It was like 24, I think.
Because Los Angeles has had one of the more successful Olympics because they had the infrastructure in place. Yep. They didn't have to build any stadiums, so they could go pretty lean on their costs. And economists pointed that as one of like a good example of doing it right versus doing it wrong, which is like
Beijing spent $44 billion, I think, on the last one, and their budget is like $4 billion this time. So at least they don't have to build that much. But last time it was the Summer Olympics. So if they've got a Winter Olympics, I would expect they'd still have to build, some facilities. Ski jump isn't really useful.
Man, the prices can get out of control. I read in Sochi, it was supposed to cost $12 billion, and they ended up spending $50 billion.
Wow.
So, Forex.
Anyway, so we'll keep an eye on that, and I'll let you guys know when the opportunity is up to book those tickets for the South Korea Winter Olympics coming up. Let's move on to some news and updates. We've got a couple items. Obviously, the big one, we're going to talk a little bit about the 100K offer with the new Chase Sapphire Reserve card. And we've also got a quick reminder about Citi application rules, which are going to be changing soon. And I think a couple of user questions.
Yeah, we do. And
listener questions.
And one thing I wanted to add really quick is that Google Flights has changed some of their search options. So there's more filters than there used to be, at least as of a month ago. And one of our members from the private community, JT, who's actually a contributing author at the Points Guy, he wrote a pretty cool post. It's pretty in-depth and gives just the normal traveler quick insights on how to find the best deals on Google Flights. I read through the article, thought it was definitely worth it. So we'll link to that in the show notes on how to find a good deal based on if you're a little bit flexible, and just really cool filtering stuff based on preferences, where you're trying to go, how much you're willing to spend, time of day travel, pretty much as advanced search as I've seen for flights.
Very cool. All right, well, let's jump to the big one. So Chase Sapphire Reserve has just come out. The offer is 100,000 ultimate rewards points.
After 4K spend.
And 4,000 spent. So the same spend as the 50,000 Chase Sapphire preferred offer. So you got a substantially higher bonus with this particular offer here. It's probably not going to last a super long period of time. So this is one you want to jump on for sure now if you're within the 524 rule for Chase.
Yeah. So we've got reports that the 524 is applying to this. Some people weren't quite sure. There are some workarounds, but it's not exactly the most direct thing. It requires being kind of a higher net worth person and having a personal relationship with Chase. One thing I did read on is that you need to have Chase needs to be willing to give you $10,000 worth of credit, I think. So if you're somebody that's maybe only got a couple grand in credit, you may not be eligible for this card.
Okay, so I know that the sort of the unwritten rule with the Chase Sapphire Preferred is about 5,000 in credit needs to be allocated. I know that it's at one point I had to shift some of my credit from another account. So I guess the one key takeaway here is if you have other personal cards with Chase, you're pretty likely to be able to move some of those balances around so that you can add up a 3,000 balance or credit limit here and a 4,000 credit limit there. And if they would approve you for 3 normally, you could tack on another 3 plus another 4 and you're to 10. So I do think it's definitely worth it, even if you don't quite have that much credit accumulated already. But, be aware that that's going to be a factor. If your income's only $30,000 a year, this might not be a card you're going to get approved.
Yeah, let's revisit some application stuff because Frequent Marla had some interesting insights on this. But first of all, we should talk about what is probably the big question. $450 annual fee. Is it worth it? And I personally think it's pretty easy to. 100,000 points. You would pay $450 for that. But the really nice thing with this card is you get $300 in travel credit each year. And this is super flexible stuff. It's hard to imagine somebody not maxing out this $300 travel credit because it's on virtually anything travel. It's on plane tickets, hotels, Airbnb, Uber. So that right there takes the annual fee down to $150. And then there's some other perks. You get lounge access, which is super valuable. Lounges are expensive. So if you travel quite a bit, that's a nice perk. So, I mean, especially considering 100,000 points, I don't think it should even be a question, the annual fee, at least for the first year or two.
Well, and the other thing is that you get the $300 statement credit per calendar year. So applying now, you've got a chance, as long as you're going to spend $300 on travel between now and December 31st, you got a chance to use that credit now and use it one more time before your annual fee comes up. So it definitely makes sense, in that context, to get the card if you can get approved, if you're within the 524 rule. This is definitely the right time to apply for the Chase Sapphire Reserve.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you about that I thought was interesting is frequent milers said if you do not instantly get approved for this card, just let the system do its thing and see if you somehow get approved after the system does it, as opposed to calling reconsideration right off the bat.
Yeah, I think, so number one, if you are not within 524 but want to give it a chance, you definitely should not call reconsideration, at least until you get a denial letter in the mail.
Right.
So if you're at a pending decision, you may want to wait for that decision to sort of play out and see if it's possible that maybe the system approves you. There's been some speculation about the application process that although 524 is being enforced by agents who are making application decisions, it may not be enforced within the rules of what the automated system is going to do to approve you or not approve you if you're sort of a pending review. So I think it is probably good advice to hold off on calling reconsideration with this card if you know for sure that you're over the 524. If not, I think you're probably okay giving recount a call and just trying to get an instant situation. I'm curious. I'm definitely going to go for this application. I've got 4 of the last 2 years, so 4 open cards. This will be the last one, and then for the foreseeable future, I'll be out of the box for Chase cards. But I think this is worth it. There's really no other.
Hard to imagine there's going to be a better sign-up bonus in the next year.
Yep, and keep in mind a couple of things to just be aware of. If there's another card maybe that you really wanted to get, there are a couple cards that are excluded. So the IHG card, which is a hotel card, the Hyatt card, and also the British Airways frequent flyer card with Chase. All 3 of those seem to be exempt from the 524 rule at this point. So if one of those was one that you were sort of holding out for, get the Sapphire Reserve, and then you should still be able to get those other cards even if you're past 5.
Yeah, while we're still on the Reserve, one thing I wanted to say is for those people that signed up for the resource, it's almost done. We'll be sending that to you shortly. Just a couple things we want to put some finishing touches on, the redemption insights to help you get the most out of the 100,000 points. We're to advise you on the benefits as well, but the main value is going to be the 100,000 points. It should be worth well over $2,000 worth of travel.
Yep, and we'll have that linked in the show notes as soon as it's ready. So if you're just happening by and you want to check it out, take a look. Everybody that did sign up, thanks to the opt-in that we had last week, you guys will get an email as soon as it's ready. So we'll let you know as soon as it is out there.
Yeah. All right, man. We got some stuff with Citi, application stuff going on. They're clamping down a little bit.
Yeah, so we're going to, this is sort of going the same direction of Chase at the moment. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago. So this is just a reminder that the rules are going to take effect on August 28th. Now, this is not official. So the August 28th number comes from Dr. Credit, who tends to be pretty good. I've followed his blog for quite a while, and he tends to get it right when he says something, or he doesn't say something if he doesn't know. So I think that it's probably safe to make whatever moves you're going to make by the 27th. And assume that these rules take effect on the 28th. So you've got a few days from the time that this show is going to air. And so here's what's changing. First of all, rules that are staying the same is you can't apply for more than one card in an 8-day period. So after you apply for one card, you've got to wait at least 8 days to apply for a second card, even if it's a business card and the first card was a personal card. So minimum of 8 days between any application. Number 2 is that you get a maximum of 2 cards every 65 days. So Citi is sort of the exception, whereas Chase and Amex, you can apply for a business and a personal card on the same day. Not the case with Citi. You got to wait 8 between. So that stuff is not changing. What is changing is that Citi has put in place a new rule that says that you need to wait 24 months after opening or closing a card in the same group or the same family. And what that really means is a card that earns the same type of points. Mm-hmm. So if you've got a Citi Thank You card, maybe you've got the Thank You Preferred or the Thank You Prestige, you can't get another card that earns Thank You points if you've either opened or closed one of those cards in the last 24 months. So a 2-year waiting period. So if you just closed, let's say you just closed your Executive Advantage Platinum card from American Airlines. So if you've just closed the Executive Advantage card from Citi, you can't get another card that earns American miles for another 2 years. So if you know that happened recently, you either opened a card or closed a card, and there's another one that you want to get that in before the 27th or on the 27th at the latest. Otherwise, these new rules should be taking effect. And definitely going to make a little bit more strategy required with the city. I know that we're working right now on building these new rules into our logic for the app. And so the goal here is that if you guys track your cards with us, and you can sign up for free. We'll have a link in the show notes. You can sign up for a free account and add your credit cards. Just figure out, when you open those accounts and when you've closed any accounts. And we're putting all this logic in there so that it'll track those things and know whether you're eligible for a particular card application or an offer. So I definitely think this is a little bit frustrating to see Citi do the same thing as Chase to a certain extent of kind of trying to limit this. But there's enough good card products out there that if you just do this in a well-organized way and aren't super aggressive, you should still be able to get, anywhere from 100 to 150,000 points each year with Citibank. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's a lot of points, right? There's enough card products and enough different families. You can get hotel points through Citi. You can get American Airlines miles. You can get Citi Thank You miles. So I think that there's going to be opportunities. And also, now that Barclays is in the game with American Airlines,
you can double up on AA miles.
You can get AA from another issuer. So I don't see this as the end of the world by any means, but definitely take action if you're up against this rule. And so I guess one last time, if you've opened or closed a card that earns the same type of currency as a card you're considering, now is the time you want to get that new card before the 27th. Otherwise, you're going to not get the bonus. And it's not even clear if they're going to deny people. It just seems like they're just not going to give them the bonus, which is a crappy thing to do. So make sure you get in early enough.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the app and credit card recommendations and storing card info for people, before we get into the user questions from a couple people, I want to give a quick member shout out to Mr. Alan Walton. Saw on Twitter today, saw a picture of you and Tim Ferriss. No idea what was going on there, but that's pretty cool. I'm guessing a lot of the people that listen to the show know who Tim Ferriss is one way or the other. So that was pretty cool. Kudos, Alan, however you managed to get a picture with Tim Ferriss.
Yeah, very cool.
So back to the user questions. We fielded a couple questions recently. I got some feedback from people that we gave credit card recommendations to. We thought these would be useful to go over because we've failed to communicate some key stuff about the way we go about helping people earn points. And this feedback was kind of showed that we need to do a better job of communicating this. So the first piece of feedback that we got was, the person said, I believe along the lines of, I hate American Airlines. I don't want this card. So it's totally understandable if this person or if you don't have the best feelings towards American Airlines or if you don't want to fly American Airlines. But the thing that they were missing or that we missed to communicate to them is that earning AA miles does not mean that you have to fly on an American Airlines operated flight.
Yep.
You've got their alliance partners, which there's some really good ones. I mean, Cathay Pacific, Japan, Etihad, just to name a few. So for people that think getting American Airlines miles means you can only fly on American Airlines flights, that is just not the way it works.
Yep, definitely a really good point. And, it depends a little bit on how deep this hatred goes because you do still have to book through American. Like, you're not going to deal with American flight attendants or American gate agents for the most part, but you do either have to hire us and we'll happily deal with American for you, or you've got to book through American Airlines either by their website or by phone. So there's a little bit of interaction there. But I would say, I have flown American maybe once ever using American miles, and every other flight has been operated by Cathay. In fact, the only times I've flown on American, I've usually ended up with using British Airways miles because those tend to be shorter direct flights. So at any rate, you're definitely not trapped there. As AJ mentioned, Cathay, Etihad, Japan Airlines, Air Berlin is really making a bunch of improvements to their product. I think, I'm excited to take some flights on land here in Latin America. I've got one booked from Bogota to Sao Paulo. So, there's some really good options. And American is a zone-based frequent flyer program, which means that there are some arbitrage opportunities. Sometimes you're going to win big, in comparison to some of the other pricing that's out there. It's a nice contrast to British Airways. So at any rate, really good to have that flexibility. And so try not just with AA, but with any of those co-branded cards to remember that the miles you're earning are probably good on at least 20 different airlines, and you're not trapped.
Yeah, if you want to have a real simple view, if you get airline points, it means you're attached to about 1/3 of the airlines in the world. You're not hitching your wagon to just one particular airline. This next question is actually kind of similar, where we recommended the same card to this user, and they asked, so they actually were very thankful for it, but they said, wouldn't it be better if I earned points like Chase points instead of American points? So to give you background, this app user is going to Europe next March. They spend about $1,500 a month. Their credit is a little bit better than average, but not great. And they already have the Chase Sapphire card. So had they not had the Chase Sapphire card, we would have recommended them the Chase Sapphire card over the Citi AA card of 50,000 points, because the 524 rule, 50,000 ultimate rewards points are super valuable. But after that, if you're spending under $2,000 a month, the Citi AA at $50K is about as good as it gets right now with the bonuses.
Yep. And I think it's honestly, it's mostly a thing of timing, especially as the banks start to restrict when you can get those bonuses. Having to wait 2 years since the last time you opened or closed a card that earns American points. Now, that wasn't a factor for this person, but if the offer is at 50,000 and it usually is at 30, and I would say in 2016 it's been at 30 for the vast majority of the year. We've only seen a couple of short periods of time that this Citi Platinum Select cards.
And this isn't even like a widely publicized link. I forgot where we found this link, but
it's footer. It's somewhere in the footer.
If you go to these big credit card compare websites that have almost all the credit cards, they're linking to 30,000 point offers. On American Airlines website, they're linking to a 30,000 point offer, and somehow we got our hands on a link to a 50,000 point offer. Like Eric said, that's 20,000 points better than the normal, and if you can get the sign-up bonuses at average or higher than normal amounts, you're going to win in the long run.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And hopefully, whoever asked that question, I know that we definitely have some ground to make up in terms of explaining how we come to decisions. And, so one of the things that we're doing right now is really spending some time trying to explain how the points will either combine with points that someone already has. And so, we talk a lot on the show about how to combine one-way tickets, maybe use one program on the way down and the other program on the way back. So we're kind of working on that, but I definitely really appreciate the feedback, even though the person kind of gave us this message that was like, a little bit hand to head, like, yeah, but you got to understand these are really useful points, but it's on us to sort of explain how this works. So if you guys are using the app or sort of in the process of going through the card recommendations with us now, please don't hold back. Give us the full details of sort of what's going through your head, what your concerns are, because we want to make it an easier process overall, so that you really have a solid amount of confidence that the points that you're earning are going to get you the travel you want coming up.
Yeah, and if you guys do want credit card recommendations from Eric and I for free, just head to abroaders.com. There's a big orange button. I believe it says sign up. It's free. It is free. So we will get you credit card recommendations as long as you give us some simple info, enough info that will allow us to help you.
I think that's it for the news. The only other thing I had in my notes, I wanted to mention this. Some baby was born on a Seibu Pacific flight, and the airline decided to give her and her family members 1 million frequent flyer miles.
Wonder what their program's like.
That was the first thing I thought. I was like, wondering what kind of points those are. Never heard of those guys. So anyways, there's a infant somewhere out there that's loaded rich with frequent flyer miles. So I hope that works out well.
That's kind of cool story.
Nice move for the airline. I mean, they didn't have to do that.
Yeah, really good on the airline. All right, well, United is a big thing going on right now because October 6th, we have some pretty dramatic changes. And it's not necessarily that United is going to become the worst program, but a big opportunity that they've lavished us is going away. And so last week we touched on 6 things you need to know when booking a multi-city ticket. So we're going to recap what we did last week, and then we're going to go a little bit further. Eric and I have recently created a resource that I think is pretty comprehensive, by no means perfect, but we take a lot of stabs at different options and different plays, different ways you can use these points. So to give you guys a recap on what we covered last week with United and their chart and what's going to change, some key things to know if you're booking a multi-city trip. First one is with a round-trip ticket, you can do 2 open jaws and 1 stopover.
Okay. And number 2 is that your stopover doesn't have to be in your same region as your destination. So United has a total of 17 different frequent flyer regions. Each region has a few countries. And right now, you can have your stopover in a different region. That's going to change on the 6th.
Yeah. The third one is open jaws or not. It's not adding another stop. It's just changing your origin and destination. So an example would be you fly into one city, and then on your same itinerary, you fly out of another city. So you have to sort out the way to get from the airport you flew into to the airport you're flying out of.
Yeah. So number 4, we talked a little bit about understanding the zone power ranking, sort of the most powerful zone, which basically means that if you touch 2 different regions on a trip, say you go from the U.S. and you stop in Japan and Southeast Asia, if you do that, United is not always going to give you the higher price of the 2. So let's say, just for example, a round trip from the U.S. to Japan is 70,000 points round trip, and a trip from the U.S. to Southeast Asia, let's say Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, is 80,000 round trip. It's not necessarily true if you touch both of those regions that they're going to charge you the higher price of 80,000. So understanding the most powerful zones and how they work is really key, because sometimes a stop, if you really just want to go to Southeast Asia, you can actually save 10,000 points by stopping in Japan. And I would say there's at least 4 or 5 of those things where there's opportunities to stop in another region and reduce your price from the U.S., and there's probably a couple for every origin region in the world, because their power rankings change. So that's really critical. And that's actually one of the things we can come back to today, because I think that's one of the things we sort of learned more about as we were working on it.
Yeah, absolutely. The fifth one is there's a limit to how many connections you can get with a round-trip ticket. So what that means is you may have to curb some of your crazy routing and stops. You don't just get your stopover and then your open jaw and you get to return by any means necessary. There's a limit of connections you can have. So you may have to be a little bit selective on exactly how your itinerary pans out and where your stopovers are.
Yep, and that can be, I think the biggest challenge with that is that often the extra connections are necessary to find availability. So obviously you take the direct flight if you could just get the direct flight to where you were going, but sometimes you got to stop somewhere because the direct flight is already booked and there's no saver rewards. So the key thing to remember, and this does go back to the most powerful zone, is that you get a certain number of connections in each direction. So if Southeast Asia is your destination, maybe you get 4 connections to Southeast Asia and 4 connections back. And so we'll dive into a little bit more detail on that. But I think the key takeaway here is if you're getting an error when you're trying to book one of these tickets,
maybe you've got too many connections. If you're following the resources
and you know for sure that you've only got one stopover, you haven't screwed up the open jaw, and everything else seems to be in order, it's probably a connections issue, or maybe you just need to call and book with them.
Pretty sure I maxed out the stopovers on my way to Asia a couple years ago. I think I went like New York, Barcelona, Copenhagen, then Geneva, then off to where I'm not sure, but
so there are some regions also that have unlimited connections. There's about half of the region pairs that have some arbitrary connection limit, which is generally 4 each direction for the round trip. So anyways, just be aware for that. And then last but not least that we covered last week was when doing research. Remember that some of the partners don't show up on United's website, and the guide that we just built has a list of the partners and who's available on the website and who's not. So you can use that as a reference point. But Aeroplan's really good. ANA is not so user-friendly, but it is accurate. But you do have to have some ANA points. It's probably not worth it. If you don't have an ANA account, I wouldn't even bother trying to get this set up. It's hell. But if you get an ANA account and you have points, their search tool is accurate. It's just not user-friendly. Aeroplan is a lot more user-friendly, pretty accurate, and shows a few things that United doesn't. So that's kind of a good combo to use the two of those to look for availability. And then if you ended up finding flights via Aeroplan that you couldn't get to show up with United, then you can call to book.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Man, there's one more example I wanted to share with the most powerful zone stuff, and that's because Australia seems to be a pretty popular destination amongst our listeners. So just to give you an idea of kind of how bizarre their logic is, if you go from the U.S. to Australia round trip, it's going to be 80,000 points. Toss in a stopover at, say, Fiji, and you're going to save 10,000 points. So you go U.S., hang out in Fiji, see the beaches in Fiji, see if you can maybe find Vijay Singh playing some golf. Then you go on to Australia, then head home, and that's going to be 10,000 points less than if you did not have your nice little stop in Fiji searching for Vijay Singh.
Very cool. So I think what I learned from building this guide and kind of where I wanted to go on this is that I really didn't realize how irrelevant the return trip is to the definition of a round trip. And so this is something that if you missed last week's show, it probably will help to just kind of go back and review in more detail some of the other stuff that we talked about. But what I wanted to focus on here is the fact that the only thing that really defines a round trip as far as United is concerned is if you're connecting more than two regions together. So in other words, once you establish your destination, so let's say you fly from the U.S. to Europe and you do a stopover there, and Europe to Southeast Asia, which is one of the trips that AJ and I took a year ago, and we just brought that all the way back to the U.S. And at the time, that was the only thing I knew that we were allowed to do. Right. But until October 6th, what you can do from your arrival in Southeast Asia. So because Southeast Asia is a more powerful zone than Europe, that counts as your destination, which means that Europe is your stopover, and you can't have an open jaw in Europe because it's your stopover. So you've got whatever airport you touch in Europe, it's got to be the one you leave from to go to Southeast Asia. But once you get to Southeast Asia, number one, you can have an open jaw. So that open jaw can be within Southeast Asia, which means you could arrive in Ho Chi Minh City, which is in Vietnam in Southeast Asia, and depart from Bali, which is in Indonesia. That's an open jaw within the Southeast Asian region, and that's perfectly cool to do. But the other thing that you're allowed to do is open jaw complete regions. So you can actually open jaw from Japan back to the U.S., or you can open jaw from Japan to Cuba, right? So that's where it gets really, really ridiculous, and this is definitely getting eliminated in October. And I'm kind of mad that I only really fully grasped how this works now. But so that's the reality is that you can have a stopover. So you fly U.S. to Europe, stopover in Europe. And let's change it up for a second. Let's say that you end your original trip in Africa. So you go from U.S. To Munich, hang out there for a little bit, and then you go down to South Africa. You go to Cape Town. Cape Town's your destination. You can actually open jaw and fly out of someplace in India and continue onward to Australia or something like that. So there's some really, really strange and awesome combos. And in the post, so we put together a resource that's about 25 pages on the United program, what you can do now, examples, maps showing you what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. The other thing that I realized when we were working through this is there's definitely some region prohibitions that are frustrating and likely to cause the search to break or not give you results when you're looking for it on United.
Yeah, isn't South America the region that just gets beat up?
South America is the no friends region, man. You can connect from, so if South America is one of the regions that you want to stop in, you can only connect basically vertically. You can't connect anywhere east or west of South America. You can connect in Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean, or the U.S. or Canada. but nothing. I think there may be one exception. There's a Sao Paulo to Johannesburg flight, and I think that might be an exception. But I've got mixed information, so we're probably actually going to have to book one of those. I think I saw something come in that somebody read our post and was like, "Oh, that's cool. I'd like to do the hardest one that you guys found." So we'll get back and let you know if we find out that exception is in place. But bottom line here is that if you're up for some sort of crazy around the world type trip that doesn't even return to where you started, this is a really good opportunity. And remember, you can use other miles when you're doing this. So I think top things to keep in mind here, connecting open jaws. Look at British Airways. It's a distance-based chart.
Yep.
If there's a direct flight between your open jaw, that's awesome. Number two, look at low-cost carriers. So if you're looking at an open jaw,
if you're
a lot of them are in Asia.
If you're in Europe or you're in Southeast Asia, super cheap.
Yep. And I mean, I think, so Europe's not a very powerful zone. So a lot of times Europe will be the stopover, meaning you can't open jaw there. But depending, I mean, definitely you can use low-cost carriers to fly around Europe and then come back to your stopover point to continue. Southeast Asia is a really good place to do the open jaw and get advantage of a different start point for a long-haul flight. And there, AirAsia is super cheap. There's Cathay Pacific.
You can even play around with
Hong Kong that are direct. They can be booked through British Airways. Great opportunities to use the BA program to use miles there.
Using open jaw is a really good opportunity to be on a good flight heading home if you do want to actually come home. Because think about it, you find the best availability, and then you just sort out a way to get there.
That's true.
You know what I'm saying? Because if you're in Southeast Asia, it's going to be cheap to go pretty much anywhere. So you say, which airline do I want to fly? What itinerary looks best, book that, and then you sort your way there for probably $75.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is worth keeping an eye on if you're sort of planning this out. Now, again, you're going to be able to book through early September 2017 in the waning days of the glory movement of United Old School bookings. So by the first week of October, I would be really careful not to book the last couple of days because the phone lines are going to be totally jammed. But if you give it towards the end, you can have travel through September 2017. It gives you a little bit of time now to sort of look for mistake fares. If you're really not sure what kind of creative trip you want, you might consider just looking for any mistake fare that'll get you one way, to basically close the open jaw. So if you do the 4-region method and you do something like US to Europe to Africa, open jaw, India to Australia or something like that, you're going to need a trip back eventually, unless you just are literally just rambling around. You're going to eventually want to get home. So you might kind of look at maybe the thing that inspires you is you find that super cheap flight on Etihad that goes from South Africa to India. So you got the open jaw taken. Now you plan the rest of that trip. So some interesting stuff. We'll definitely keep you guys posted on any other developments here. But definitely, if you have United points or you have Chase points, download this resource. We'll have the link in the show notes. It's totally free, and we worked really hard. I think it's going to help a lot of people.
Yeah, really good in-depth stuff, and I think Eric created most of it. I think he did a really good job of easing people into things. You're not getting too intense on the first couple pages, but very straightforward. And the thing that was even helpful for me is the examples. Man, I'm a little kid seeing the images with airport codes, JFK.
I had fun putting this together.
It's good stuff. So I definitely urge anyone, with United or Chase points to check that out because you'll probably you'll learn a lot and probably find your points are way more valuable than you thought, especially before October 6th.
Don't read whatever you do. Don't download the resource on October 7th. You're going to be really mad. All right, I think that wraps up for this week's show. Do you got anything else to add, man?
Man, that's it. I wish I had more to say, but I'll just shut up. That's it.
All right, well, let it ride there. Thank you so much for being with us. AJ and I will be back here in Medellin, Colombia next week, 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Wherever you are, travel safe.
Cheers.
Hey, brothers, don't be shy. Hop over to the website and join our email list for exclusive travel hacking content. If you like what we're up to, the best way you can support the show is by leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes. Lastly, we would love to hear from you, so send your show feedback to Eric or AJ at abroaders.com. We will see you next week.